as a kid, I was absolutely terrified of haunted corn mazes. I have this memory of wandering through one with glow sticks on with my family and just being terrified out of my mind. So I knew that that's the feeling I kind of wanted to capture for my first scary game. So this is my journey trying to make my first ever horror game in Godot and everything I learned along the way. It's time for me to create my first ever horror game. It will be set in some sort of corn maze, and glow sticks will come into play as some sort of lighting mechanic. I have some inspiration images here. I'm planning to make the game 3D with some sort of pixelation effect to make it more spooky and a little bit less complicated to model and texture things. I also just watched Over the Garden Wall and I found it super inspiring. I love the whimsical, spooky aspects, so I want to capture that in the game I make. I think the general premise for the game is that you are a kid going into a corn maze during the daytime, and maybe you trip or something happens and you wake up and it's now nighttime and the corn maze is completely transformed into this kind of spooky world. And so now you have to figure out how to get out of this corn maze world and get home. I don't have a ton of time today, so I'm not sure how much I'll get done, but let's just try it out. I first added the ground and a player controller I had from a previous project and just set up the basic environment. And then I started experimenting with how I could achieve that pixelation effect. One way to do this is just to render the entire game at a low resolution and then scale it up, and you kind of get this effect for free. But the problem with that approach is that it also obviously does this to anything in the game, including text and UI, and that might not be what you want. So then I experimented with a different approach using a sub-viewport to achieve this effect. I think this works. Now, if you want to, you can have labels and things that aren't affected by the pixelation, but everything that's in here is affected. I made the player a bit shorter to feel more like a kid, and I then decided to start working on some 3D models to set up the environment. So yeah, let's start with like a sign like this. I made a corn maze entrance sign. I decided to keep things simple with texturing and just use a really tiny gradient color palette approach where I would share the same texture between all models, or pretty much all models in the game. And then I started thinking about how to do the corn stalk models. I'm not sure how to model this exactly because just doing tons of corn models probably won't be great to get the density I want to be basically walls. So I just modeled one corn stalk and brought it into Godot to see how it would look. I mean, this could work, right? But maybe we need to like layer something between the corn and make like walls we can place. It definitely just looks like you can walk through it, which is maybe not ideal. It's a decent proof of concept, I guess. We'll come back and make this better though. I've been thinking a little bit about optimization. I'm not sure if I need to use some sort of multi-mesh instancing to make sure these are all happening as like one draw call since they're the same mesh. I think though in Godot 4 and the 4 plus renderer, from what I've read, it should automatically do this when models are the same, so they should all be one draw call. But I think for now, maybe what I'll do is I'll just make some separate scenes for different pieces of the corn maze, so like walls and corners. And I'll try inserting a plane mesh kind of in between the corn to make it look more dense, and we'll see how that looks, and we'll come back to optimization if we actually need to. So to experiment with this, I made a corn wall scene that I could then use to make the maze. I added a multi-mesh instance to randomly place a bunch of corn stalks on a plane to act as the wall shape. And then I added that plane mesh in the middle of the corn and added an image of corn stalks to it. And it was basically working. It was having the effect I wanted. I tweaked the rendering settings a bit to make the game even more pixelated, and I was really liking how it was looking. I added a collider to the corn walls and then set up the initial environment a bit more. And I played around with some texturing for the ground to make it look a bit more interesting. Kind of fun. Like I think I'm finding a weird style just by messing around with this. I decided it was time for some more 3D modeling, so I set out to make a glow stick because I knew that would be a major mechanic for the game, kind of acting as a flashlight to navigate the maze. So I modeled it and brought it into the game and added it to the player scene so they were carrying it. I tweaked the materials to make the shell transparent and the liquid glow. And I realized here that it would be really cool if the liquid actually would move as you move to give it a more liquidy feeling. It also would be nice if it could like slosh around inside. And spoilers, I ended up spending way too much time trying to implement this effect despite deciding at this time, but that might be a little ambitious for this project. I decided to add a light to the glow stick to make it better illuminate environments, kind of acting as a flashlight. But I decided I would tweak it more later once I figured out the actual night setting in general. So this is really for the creepy environment. I'm not really sure how the lighting will work yet, but it is certainly a vibe. I had this idea for a spooky inn in the center of the maze with an innkeeper that you would talk to, and that would kind of be your home base, because I thought that would add to the whimsical, spooky, over the garden wall inspired vibe. So I decided to mock up the inn building now, and I then brought it into Godot and just tested it out. I'm digging the vibes. I think this is cool. I just couldn't resist the idea of trying to make the glow stick actually move like liquid. It seems like most implementations of this are based on this one tutorial from Minions Art. So I'm going to try to kind of copy their technique, maybe modify it a little bit. So I think the basic idea is that the fill line should be relative to the world position, because as you can see in this example here, when you move a container of liquid around, the liquid kind of stays parallel to the world, like the ground. So we kind of want to replicate that effect. So first I had to make an actually separate inner liquid mesh in my glow stick. So we want to apply a shader to this liquid mesh that will only render some amount of the liquid, and then also kind of render it on the line that's parallel to the object position relative to the world, something like that. I first just wanted to make it so that I could use a shader parameter to set the height of the liquid in the glow stick. This took longer than I expected to figure out. I thought this would be easy to implement based on the guide, but it's not exactly. But after a bunch of tweaking shader code, I did get that working. Okay, so that's now working correctly. And I also added some code to fill in the top face of the liquid with a different color to make it look better. Then I started trying to figure out how to actually make the liquid render based on the rotation of the mesh in the world. I got it doing something pretty quickly, but it wasn't doing what I wanted. So it's getting the parallel effect right now, but not effect of keeping the volume looking the same. I'm just feeling kind of tired. I think I'll just come back tomorrow. I kept trying to figure out how to make the liquid work accurately. I drew some diagrams, so maybe this will help me. I decided I would just spend the rest of the day on this and then move on, because I knew I had to get to other things. I realized that to actually see how the effect was working, it would be good if the glow stick actually moved as the player walked. So I worked on adding some bob and sway to it as the player moves. Through doing this, I actually realized that it already looked pretty good, even if it wasn't completely accurate. It was still capturing the effect I wanted. You know, it already kind of looks like the liquid's moving, even though it's not accurately doing so. The volume doesn't make sense, like it's filling up all the way, but it might be okay. So I realized maybe it was okay as it was, and it was time to move on, and maybe someday I'll come back and do a whole video on this exact effect. I think I need to make the actual night mode. So I think we'll start with that, and then we'll figure out the glow stick timer mechanic. To turn the corn stalk spooky at night, I added a second UV map for the corn, and then I added a new shader material to the corn mesh and a Boolean night mode parameter that would set whether the corn mesh used UV1 or UV2 for getting the albedo from the albedo texture. All right, there we go. Okay, now let's figure out how to change the environment to make it look like nighttime. Then I started tweaking the environment's fog and lighting settings to make the spooky nighttime environment come to life. All right, so we're in the day and then spooky. I adjusted the light coming from the glow stick to make it more flashlight-like. We might come back to this later, but I think the vibes work okay. And I set up a timer and fade system for the glow sticks so that they would eventually run out over time and die. So now, as this glow stick expires over 30 seconds, the light will slowly fade, and so will the glow stick's emission. I wrote some code so that when the glow stick runs out after a little bit of time, the player gets teleported to a respawn location. Okay, it's almost about to run out, and then in 5 seconds we should be teleported. Okay, so the basics are there. I had a different color glow sticks so that you get a random one every time. And I made it so that when the player has multiple glow sticks in their inventory, when one dies, it will reload and go off screen, activate again, and come back on to mimic cracking a new glow stick. This is fine for today. Now I think I should be able to actually get some gameplay worked out next time. Now that I have this kind of mechanic working. So on the agenda for today, I need to actually make some sort of effect when your glow sticks completely run out and you get pulled off by the mysterious monster. The plan was to actually make it scary when you run out of light, because this was supposed to be a horror game after all. But I also knew I didn't really want to create the monster like with a 3D model, because that would be difficult and I didn't know what I wanted it to look like. So I knew I wanted to rely heavily on sounds. So I implemented a screen fade, which already helped things. And then I spent some time just looking for spooky sounds. I found a bunch that I thought could work. I mean, that's kind of fun. These sounds are kind of stressing me out. And then I just started thinking about how to sequence them to make it scary. And I spent a while tweaking the timing and sequencing until I got something I was happy with. Okay, honestly, that's pretty good. I think what I want to do now is model character I had in mind, the innkeeper. Basically, I want to do something inspired by Over the Garden Wall, like this character. And they're supposed to be like ambiguous whether they're good or not. I modeled a kind of creepy looking pumpkin head character and put it into the game to see what it would look like. I mean, that's pretty creepy. Then, as always, I spent a while trying to figure out how to rig the character for animation and eventually got that set up. I made an idle animation and then brought that back into the game, and I was pretty satisfied with how this was looking. So we have a character and spooky character. I wanted to make the inn an actual building with a door and a window so you could actually go in. I was able to use some models I had already made from a different project to speed up this process, and it's kind of nice in general starting to have a library of 3D models I can pull from that I've made myself. I brought this updated inn into the game and added some lighting around the room. And once I positioned the objects around the room as well, I was pretty happy with how things were looking. I think today what I want to do is kind of set up the intro to the game. I started setting up the map for the intro area, which I envisioned as just a cornhole with a turn, and the player would get knocked out or fall down before turning the corner. Maybe about here you'll trip. I added an area that would trigger the knockout effect when the player reached it. I made an animation for the player getting knocked out or falling down as they reached that area, and made the screen fade out when it did. And then I set up so the player would teleport to a brand new area after this, and then stand up and have their glow stick activate at night. Well, this was a kind of fun idea because it would feel like the corn maze was shifting and maybe not as it seemed. The idea was that they would see an exit sign down the hall when they stood up, and then either not be able to reach it or be blocked from leaving and then get caught by the monster. So I set up this exit sign, and then I made it so that when the player runs out of light in this first hallway, they get teleported into the center of the maze near the end. I added birds chirping during the day, noises for falling and standing back up, and just some spooky corn maze ambiance. And I decided I wanted to add a locked door to the end below the exit signs. The player actually felt trapped, and I thought maybe they would have to find a key to get out of the maze later on. So I modeled that in Blender and brought it into Godot. I was just thinking that when you walk and fall over, it's pretty silly because there's like no reason you fall over. So maybe instead of tripping, maybe you get like hit by something and that makes you fall over. So I found a sound that implied you're getting hit in the head instead and added that in. And I tweaked the animation to make it a bit more bouncy to fit that. I also made it so that when the player wanders into the inn, some more whimsical sounding music plays. There's like a respite from the spooky world. I think this is a pretty fun opening to the game, and if I accomplished nothing else, I do like the vibes of this, and I do feel like it's helping me find my aesthetic for 3D games, actually. So yeah, I'm happy with this so far. I set up a look at modifier to make the innkeeper follow you around as you moved. That's kind of fun, right? I decided to set up an interaction system that would allow the player to interact with the innkeeper or really anything in the maze. I did this using a raycast node on the player and by creating an interactable node extending area 3D that could then be added to any scene that the player should be able to interact with when they look at it. I knew I wanted the innkeeper to have some dialogue, so for the actual dialogue system, I realized I had already written something similar for a previous Ludum Dare entry, so I was able to steal some of my own logic from my past self and get it working pretty quickly. I then added some actual dialogue and made a spooky talking sound playback in varying pitch and speed based on the length of the text. I wanted there to be another character. Pretty tired, it's like 1:30 right now. Let's just very quickly try to make some spooky eyes or something. I quickly drew something up in Sprite and added a simple animation. And in Godot, I made them always face the player. I decided they look cooler if they were smoke spirits. It'd be kind of cool if they were like smoke. So I played around with some particle system things and lighting, and eventually came up with something kind of cool. So maybe you have to find these in the maze and interact with them and they'll give you glow sticks. I added an interactable component and some dialogue to the smoke character as well, and its own unique voice. Yeah, this is actually pretty cool. I was really liking the vibes of the game at this point. Honestly, the vibes are pretty immaculate here. I may not have a game, but I do have good vibes. I guess tomorrow is supposed to be my last day, so tomorrow will be gameplay entirely. I was thinking that I would somehow finish the game the next day, but that didn't happen. I still wasn't really sure what the gameplay should be, despite really liking the vibe, so I decided to start just by building out a maze, and I would figure things out as I went. I knew I wanted the end of the maze to be an exact replica of the hallway you find yourself in when you wake up at night with the exit sign. So I set up a duplicate of that part of the level and added an interactable component to the door to let you know that it's locked unless you have a key. I ended up getting interrupted after this, so I didn't really get much done this day. I decided then that I wasn't going to rush the project and I was just going to take as much time as I needed. I don't have much time today to work, like only an hour right now, maybe a little bit later, we'll see. I have a D&D session today, so I'll just try to start making some level stuff and see how far we get. I do feel a little bit of relief now just letting myself have a few more days to work on this because I was kind of overwhelmed and that was impacting how well I was working, I think. I made some different styles of cornwall pieces to build up the maze and I started trying to actually do that. We're just kind of randomly making this now. Make some dead ends too. I decided I'd hide the smoke spirits around the maze and they would give you glow sticks when you found them. So I placed one in the maze, gave it different dialogue, and made it give you a glow stick when you talk to it, and that was all I had time for that day. So it turns out it's actually been quite a moment since I worked on this project, even though it was basically done. We'll just work on it for a couple more days and wrap it up. First, what I can figure out is how I should handle the player when they have no glow sticks here, how to make them go into the inn. I think my thought is that there'll be a safe area kind of around the inn, but when they exit that, it will start a timer and they'll get captured if they don't have any glow sticks. But to do that, I had to figure out how to actually cancel the monster sequence if the player re-entered the safe area mid-execution of the sequence. This was a bit tricky to figure out how to do well because the sequence had a lot of async await code with timers, so stopping it in the middle of it wasn't super straightforward since it could get canceled at any time during the sequence, including when any specific timer was already running and had a wait code that would be called after the sequence was already canceled. I think though I was just really tired this day, so I wasn't thinking very clearly. Okay, I think this is just worse. Why did I do this? It seems like it's mostly working, but then sometimes it just isn't. So I just had to come back the next day to get it working. Turns out taking a break was a really good idea. Pretty much immediately the next day, I realized how to solve the problem. I just needed to make sure that any code running after an await on a timer in the out of light sequence would check the current sequence ID, and if the ID didn't match the execution of the locally stored sequence ID, it would return early to cancel out that code execution. And this worked. Okay, I'm pretty sure this is working now, so that's good. See, sometimes it is good to just take a break and come back to it with fresh eyes because I was really struggling the other night. And then I did a bunch of things that I ended up actually undoing later, so I won't really talk about it too much. But I made it so that when you leave the in-safe area, if you have a glow stick, it automatically activates. When you enter the safe area, the glow stick pauses and gets put away for later use. I made it so that getting a new glow stick cancels the monster out of light sequence. And I made it so that talking to the innkeeper replaces any of your out of energy glow sticks you've collected. 27 glow sticks. Hope tomorrow I can basically just finish the game because now I think I have the key elements of gameplay. So yeah, maybe just 1 or 2 more days. All right, it is time to actually make this into a full game sequence. I decided that the gameplay loop would basically be a speed run where you figure out the route to the exit that lets you acquire all of the required glow sticks and maybe a key, and then escape without being brought back to the inn. First made the inn a bit more interesting, but I added some floating candles from my Gothic cathedral project. And then I made it so the innkeeper would just give you 1 glow stick when you return after you run out, so you'd have to find them all again the next time if you get captured by the monster. And added some different dialogue depending on your status. I made the smoke spirits disappear after you get a glow stick from them, and then made them respawn after you're captured. I added some sound effects for acquiring a glow stick and for the smoke spirit disappearing. And then I spent some time building out the maze map to have 3 different paths to go through with winding directions and dead ends and more smoke spirits. I tested out how long it would take to get from the inn to the exit. And based on this, I wasn't sure how long I should make the glow sticks actually last to enable the player to actually reach the exit. I just wasn't really sure how things should work in general in terms of timing. At the end of the day, I was relatively happy with how the map was looking, but I wasn't sure how to make the gameplay work. So I'm just changing the map a little bit to make it have more options. These are now interconnected, but I'm not sure exactly how to make this gameplay make sense now. I keep getting derailed from this project. I spent the last couple of days just learning about 3D printing, and now I want to get a 3D printer, but that's really not relevant to this project. It's really time to wrap this one up, I think. But after thinking on it some more, I think what could work is to make it so that instead of glow sticks automatically activating, the player actually gets a choice when to activate their glow sticks. This would give the player more agency and choice for how they use their glow sticks, and also make it a bit more scary because you could choose to not activate a new glow stick even though you're out and the monster was approaching. You could just wait until the very last second to crack the new glow stick, and I thought that would make it more exciting. I added a simple glow stick counter for testing purposes to keep track of how many you have. And then I spent some time refactoring my code to make it so the player could choose when to activate the glow stick on right click instead of automatically. Okay, that's good. I added some tutorial text explaining how to activate glow sticks when the player enters the dark area without having one activated for the first time. Then I wanted to make the UI for the glow stick counter a bit better. I was able to use a separate sub-viewport with a separate camera that I had set up for testing before, and that let me use a screenshot I took of the glow stick as an icon plus some counting text without distorting it. I then added some more dialogue lines for the spirits, and I started placing a bunch more around the maze. I was getting a bit lost in my own maze trying to test things out. How do I get out of here? To make this better, I realized that it would be more fair and just nicer if there was a way to tell from further out that you were approaching the in-safe area. I first just tried adding a big light to the area, which helped a bit, but I realized that adding lampposts would work even better. So I set out to model a basic lamppost in Blender. While in Blender, I decided to model a key too, since I knew I was going to include that for the player to find to escape the level. I placed the lampposts around the in-area exits, and this was looking pretty good. And I added an interactable component to the key so the player could pick it up. And then I made it so that the exit door could be unlocked if the player was holding the key. I added a key icon to the inventory UI that would show up whenever you picked up the key. So now the question is, where do we put the key? I placed the key in a corner of the maze and set out to find it and got lost trying to do so. Did I go the wrong way? This is confusing. Got the key. I wonder if you can actually even beat it right now or not. Let's see if we can. I confirmed it was possible to beat the game if you knew the route out to the door, although obviously there was no ending. Okay, so it is possible to beat the game. You know, maybe we put more spirits to make it a little bit easier. Like maybe we want another one like here to lead you down here. I decided to make it a bit easier. I would duplicate the key and put it in a secondary location in the maze so that you could stumble upon either one and the other one would disappear once you found the first. I realized for the exit sign, for the dramatic effect, I really wanted it to be visible in the distance, but I think it's being affected by the distance fog. I don't think there's an easy way to get this text to not be affected because I can't set material properties on text labels 3D, I guess. So maybe I can create the text in Blender? So to get around this, I instead made the exit text in Blender myself and brought it into Godot, and then I was able to just disable the fog on the mesh material for the text, and this was working. So yeah, I think tomorrow, no matter what, I am finally going to call this done, and that will involve mostly just some final polishing and also creating some sort of ending to the game. I thought today was finally the last day. Today is the day. It is time to finish this game. And it wasn't. I decided to add some simple polish things, starting with some white picket fences and collision shapes so the player couldn't just fall off the map at the beginning of the game. I experimented with adding some texture to the end to make it look a bit more interesting, but a realistic brick texture seemed too much, so I scaled the UVs of the texture to give it a more blurry look, and in this case I think that worked well. I decided I wanted to place some objects around the maze to act as landmarks to make it easier to navigate, so I looked through my old projects to find potential things I could use without making anything new, and I first scattered some barrels throughout the map. So if you have to find the key again, you'll kind of remember, oh, I had to pass the turned over barrel. I think honestly just placing those 3 barrels helps a lot, make things a lot easier to navigate. And then I brought in some more objects from that Wizard Workshop project that I've got a lot of utility out of now. I added some of these to the inn and around the maze as more markers. And I do think these really help with navigation. Now the game was mostly complete, but I really wanted to work on the intro and outro sequences to make it feel like a complete experience with some sort of story. The idea for the very beginning of the game was that you'd have your parents in kind of Charlie Brown fashion calling you into the maze. And I also wanted to use car sounds to imply driving up to the maze and also leaving later in the outro. For the parents' voice, I looked for a bit for sound effects, but couldn't really find anything, so I made my own lovely one. If you need to hire anyone for voice acting work, I'm available. I think this intro actually turned out pretty well with your car pulling up and then being beckoned into the maze. It really captured what I was going for. I think that's a pretty good intro, actually. Okay, cool. Intro done. And now we need the ending of the game, which will be a bit more complicated, but similar principles, I think. So the idea is that after you get to the end, you will be teleported back to the beginning, but there will be like a door in front of the maze, and your parents will be like, oh, the maze is closed today, I guess we'll have to come another time. And you're like, what? Then I added a short ending sequence after you unlock the door. Alright, so that seems like that's working. And then I want some sort of jump scare here, and then it's the end. We're so close. Although it is almost midnight again. I think I'm just going to come back and finish this tomorrow morning. Let's finish this up. I think it's looking pretty good. I like the intro and the ending here. Just want to add a few final touches, I think. Let's do the easy parts first. We can add a door that's only visible in the cutscene. So I added that locked door to the corn maze after you're teleported out after unlocking the door in the night mode. And I added a weird teleporty sound effect for after you unlock the door to make it seem more mysterious. And then I wanted to add that little scare at the end to imply that maybe you never really left the maze. So I worked on a sequence with an animated camera and sound effects going down the hall of the corn to the exit once again after that drive away sequence. And then I played through the game a bunch more and decided finally I was done. Yeah, I think it's done, right? There's a whole gameplay loop. Obviously, if you play it and don't actually know the routes, it will be a lot harder. For me, it's pretty easy. There's dialogue, there's a jump scare, you know, maybe a couple jump scares, I guess. And I love the aesthetic, so I think it's done. I realized though the game was missing one final thing, a holiday update. So I modeled a turkey in Blender and put it in the inn. There we go. I have subsequently made some more holiday updates. So this is the final game, and I really love how it turned out visually. I think the aesthetic is great, and I think I've kind of found my look potentially for 3D projects going forward. I definitely plan to do more in this style across different genres. If you're interested in trying out the game for yourself, it's up now on itch and linked in the description. I really hope you have fun with it. It was a fun experience putting this together, and I'm happy I was able to make a full game with a full gameplay loop, even if it took me a little bit longer than I planned. I really think making full projects like this is probably the best way to learn, because it really forces you to think about all aspects of making a game, and actually finishing a gameplay loop is hard, as I've learned, so I'm glad I did it. Also, if you'd like to support the channel and get access to the source code for this project and all of my previous projects, I have a Patreon that I have linked in the description. As always, thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting me over there. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.